Back in high school art class, my art teacher once made us all go up in front of the class and present our artworks for a critique by him. That teacher and I did not have a great relationship. So in front of the whole class, I just got fucking slaughtered. That teacher later got fired for something involving things I don't want to talk about on this channel. So to you, Mr. Jermaine, get fucked. Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duran with DuranSupply.com, where I'll help you design smarter, not harder. Guys, I don't know anything about design. Every time I open Photoshop, I enter a manic state. I don't know what I'm doing, but today I'm critiquing your designs. But don't worry, I won't be doing y'all like my teacher did me. It's gonna be a blast. You're gonna get a peek into my thought process as I'm designing. So I asked you guys again to send in your designs for an episode 2. We're gonna go over a few of those in just a minute here. If you want your designs featured in one of these videos, go ahead and hit that follow button on my Instagram. That is where I post the links for the submissions. And also go ahead and subscribe to this channel, because you know why. Let's get to it. Okay, we're starting off with this Ariana Grande tee design by Toby_Sama on Instagram. Shout out to you for always showing love on my work. You've got a great vibe and a really good eye for composition. When I was looking through your work, it was hard to find one that was critiquable because of that. And a lot of you guys actually send in stuff that's like not critiquable. Sometimes I'm looking through the submissions and I'm like, dude, come on. You know this is good. You don't have to send this one in. So this design is great. I love it, but I chose it to critique for a few reasons. Let's get into that. Number one, overall, this design has got a great base, right? We've got a good hierarchy and scale between this big image of Ariana here and this small frame photo down in the bottom right corner here. We've also got versatility and contrast within this type arrangement here. So we have that stylized graffiti text paired with that sort of sans serif bold Futura text. And you also did a good job sort of framing this big photo using these stars as an element to sort of fill out that negative space and follow the contours of Ariana. So a really good job there. A lot of great calls made on this design already. However, a few things do stick out to me. For me, the elephant in the room here is this type arrangement. I do like that there's contrast between the fonts and you've got the right idea here, but sometimes it could be a bit too much. So taking a closer look at this, the heavily stylized graffiti font is just a bit jarring for me next to the bold and sans serif, pretty much basic Futura font down here. So I do really like the Futura here. I think it's great to add this bold text, but the graffiti text is just a bit too all over the place for me. There's too many corners and rounding and it's just a lot. And the layer styles on both of these pieces of type here is really distracting for me. We want the main focus of this design to be on the big photo of Ariana here rather than the type arrangement down here. This should be more of a complementing and supplemental elements. And when I look at this design as a whole, my eyes are immediately drawn to this type arrangement down here rather than what should be the main element visually, which is this big photo of Ariana Grande. So we want to fix the weighting and the dynamics on this graphic so that our eyes are immediately pointed to this big photo of Ariana. So in this case, less is more. I'm going to swap out this graffiti font for a script font, something a little bit simpler, but still has some sort of a stylized touch and some sort of funk to it. And I'm going to keep the Futura on the bottom here so that we still have the contrast between the bold sans serif font and a more stylized font, but we're just going to simplify this whole thing down. So I'm also going to make this large "the boy is mine" text smaller, and I'm also going to fit this all into one line to avoid breaking the text up into 3 lines. I'm also going to go a lot more simple on the styling or the layer styling of this type. So we still want the contrast on this type arrangement here, but less is definitely more in this case. So to get that contrast, like I said, I'm going to still have this as a stylized font, but I'm just going to dumb it down a little bit by using a script font, and I'm going to add a touch more of contrast to this type arrangement by having this top script font be in sort of a pinkish color, and then the bottom Futura font here being in a white or off-white color to bring in some color contrast between the two pieces of type. And that's going to help separate them and sort of guide our eyes in this graphic. It's also going to help us tie in the coloring of this entire graphic a bit more. So right now we have sort of a jarring mix between this purplish color versus this light pink sort of purplish color, and then this more reddish pink color over here on her lip. So I essentially want to simplify all that down as well and just have this be a pink color, the type here be white, and everything else that's pink in this graphic, like this photo or her lips, is going to be the same pink so that we have consistency in color throughout the design. And the skin tone is just fine, so I'm going to leave that as is. I'm also going to line up this framed photo a bit more with the text. I like that it has this rotation on it. It adds a bit more stylization and just movement to the graphic overall, but I think it's rotated just a little bit too much. So I'm going to straighten that up to sort of align it with the text, and that's going to help us sort of square out the bottom of this composition, which is going to make it look better on a t-shirt. Now the big photo here, you know I love my Xerox graphics. I'm just not a big fan of this sort of scan line look going across her face. I think that's a really cool image treatment to use on, you know, whatever image you want to use it on. But in this particular case on this graphic, since we have this big portrait sort of front facing the design, I'd say to go for a bit of a cleaner look and still keep the Xerox effect going, but just remove these sort of vertical scan lines we got going on here. I think it just obscures the face a little too much, and it's also not a consistent effect with everything else going on in the design. I also would like to add a touch more detail on here on this big photo. I know when you're thresholding things, a lot of detail gets lost. You pretty much only get the light parts of the photo in here, but using the technique that I've outlined in a lot of my videos, which is using image adjustments and then shadows and highlights. So that's right here in shadows and highlights. Using that adjustment on a photo before you threshold can get you a lot more detail out of that image and bring back some of those lost shadows, which we're seeing here. So I'm gonna bring back a lot of those lost shadows and give Ariana Grande here some more body within the design. So I might give her a little bit of an outline as well, so we can see a little bit more of her. And so all of that is gonna make this design a bit more stylistically consistent. It's also gonna help with the dynamics when you're reading this design so that your eyes don't immediately dart towards the wrong element. Like this type arrangement here, we want our eyes to be focused on the main image, the main element within this graphic, and it's going to help square out or frame the bottom of this design, which is going to help the composition feel more full and unified. All right, let's look at my take on this design. Okay, so here I'm redoing the Xerox effect on Ariana. I used these shadows and highlights adjustment to get more detail back in those shadows, and I also added an inner shadow layer style to that layer so we can get sort of an outline or halo around her head, which is going to help add some body to the composition. I also faded the bottom of her torso out before doing that filter gallery Xerox effect, which is going to get us that grainy fade consistent with the grainy look of the image. And now I'm getting a Xerox effect using the grain and stamp filter in filter gallery. I have a whole tutorial on that on my channel, by the way. Just search up Xerox effect or search up, I think it's called How to Punk Your Graphics. So search that up if you want more detail on that effect. And I colored the image with the skin tone using a color fill layer set to multiply. And I also left out the sort of outline to keep that white halo, which is gonna help tie the colors in with the other elements. And I used a soft brush on the layer mask of that color fill layer and then made it grainy using the same stack for the Xerox effect in the filter gallery. That way we get a consistent Xerox grainy look within the entirety of this design. Here I'm adding another one of these small images in that frame to behind the big photo of Ariana, which is going to help add some more depth, but also balance out that side of the composition since she is leaning to the left. And this is where I'm messing with the type arrangement, replacing that graffiti with a simpler script font and simplifying down the styling on both that and the underlying Futura text. I also added some lyrics in a text box under all that for more hierarchy between the type and to fill out that piece of negative space that was just lingering there. Okay, and here is the original design that was submitted, and here's my take on it. What do you think? Let's move on to submission number 2. Thank you, Nikki TV Crib, for sending this one in. I do hope that I'm pronouncing all your handles right. But anyway, great design that you have here. I gotta say, I have not watched the Blade Runner movies yet, which is crazy for me because it's right up my alley. So maybe I'll go do that right after this video. Okay, first things first, dude. You used my depth tone template to get this halftone effect on the design, which is great. Hell yeah, dude. Thank you for your support. Love to see it. So again, we've got a good hierarchy and scale going on here with the big image, small image, and then the background is a nice wide view, sort of distant cityscape, which really helps to world build around the rest of the elements in this graphic. So all great choices here, but now let's take a look at why I chose this graphic to critique. The first thing I noticed on this was the colors are a bit too jarring, a little bit too saturated for me, and that is actually like all personal preference, so take that with a big grain of salt. These might actually just be the default colors in depth tone, which sort of makes this my fault. So while I do love the red and yellow color combo, I think for an image like this, where the shadows are just not rolling off so smoothly, or the gradients between the shadows and the highlights are not as smooth as I'd like them to be, we want to make up for that as much as we can with color. So that means I'm going to bring the yellow midtones a bit closer to an orange to match these sort of red shadows here, and that's going to leave us with less of a break in color as we transition from our midtones to our shadows. So I'm going to shift this whole red yellow part of the design a bit more towards an orange hue and get these two colors, the midtones and shadows, a bit closer to each other in terms of hue. And I also really like that you chose blue for the backing cityscape here. I think that is a great choice in terms of color contrast. However, I would just shift it a bit more towards the purple side. That's just going to help it have a bit more harmony with the reddish orange tones that I'm going to put into this design. So as you can see, more of a faded blue like this looks better already. And if I change the color of the midtones to more of an orange, and I'll adjust these shadows a bit as well. Already we have a more tasteful color harmony going on within this graphic compared to the original. Now the composition and placing of these three main image elements are really good. Again, I like the hierarchy in scale and distance between the two photos here and the far in view city landscape in the background. However, I do think the rest of the elements in this design, like this big text up here and the bottom complementary text, could use some framing and hierarchy to really tighten up this design. And that's going to help, again, unify the composition and make the elements work a bit better with each other. So I'm going to lessen the negative space between blade and runner here. And I'm also going to bring this whole piece of title text down just slightly behind our actor's head here. That's going to help add a sense of depth within this design. We are in depth tone after all. And we want contrast in our type arrangements, right? So the Helvetica down here is actually a great contrast to the more stylized techie font up here. I always love pairing a more stylized, especially techie fonts with more of a standard simple font like Helvetica. However, I do think the bottom text down here is a bit too bold in comparison and also just a little too big. So we want to add some sort of hierarchy and scale here between the two pieces of type on this graphic. And I love Helvetica here, but I might opt for more of a not super stylized, but a little bit techie, like maybe a simple monospace font, just so that it thematically fits a bit more with the sci-fi feel we have going on in this graphic. I also want to instead center align this text rather than have it justified to the left. So that's going to help us fix the weighting and the balance within this design. Right now it's a bit too heavy coming to the bottom left here. And so if we shift these big two elements over to the right a bit and maybe mess around a little bit with the size or the placement of them, and also by center aligning this text here, that's going to help us even out the dynamics and make it easier for our eyes to read this graphic. So yeah, we want to even out the dynamics on this design. And another way I'm going to do that is by adding a large framing element behind our main elements here. So just something to sort of frame these bigger elements here. I'm thinking like a planet or some sort of like big circular shape. So that's going to help balance out the images and place the weight of this design mostly in the center. It's also going to be a nice contrast to the more rectangular feel of this design. Also, dude, hit me up so I can send you the newest version of Depth Tone. From what I could see, you added this city backdrop in the back on top of the template here, rather than doing it inside of the artwork smart object within Depth Tone. And I assume you did that because you wanted the city to be blue. And obviously within Depth Tone, you're sort of limited to these three colors that map the shadows, midtones, and highlights. But in the newest version of Depth Tone, we do have an action set that helps us get multiple hues in our image. So that's right here. And I made a whole tutorial on that, which you could check out if you want to start experimenting with things like that. So when I start workshopping this design, one of the things I'm going to do is add this city into the actual artwork smart object. And that way we can keep the dithered halftone or grainy look, not only on the main elements in this design, but on the city as well. As you can see here, when I zoom in, this is not dithered. So this would be pretty difficult to prepare for print. And also it's just inconsistent with the rest of the design here. So in just a little bit, I'll display very quickly how that works. And that way we can keep the really cool blue to orange yellow color arrangement here while still having everything actually composited within the Depth Tone smart object. So let's go ahead and see how I workshopped this design. The first thing I did on this was change those colors to something more orangey to help with the roll off between the shadows and the midtones. And I also changed the depth tone pattern from halftone to grain just because I thought it fit the design better. And I just love my Xerox grain, so that's what I chose. All right, here I'm messing with the shadows and highlights adjustment and also a black and white adjustment layer to get more detail out of that photo since it was pretty flat. So you can see me messing around with the yellow slider here to bring out more of the highlights in his face. If you're a Deron Studio regular, you know that it's best to composite in black and white, especially when you're using a template like this. It's best to composite in black and white and then worry about all the colors later as you're doing the processing effects, or if you're working in a template like Depth Tone or Vintone, etc. I also set the Depth Tone grain size smaller to get more detail shining through in those images. Here I'm messing with the bottom type, making it smaller and giving it less footprint within the design. I'm also changing the font to something a little more techy like I had mentioned. I think this font is called OCR Standard or something like that. It's just a simple sort of monospace terminal looking font. I'm also framing it using lens flares on the top and the bottom, which helps it fit better and coalesce with the rest of the design rather than it feeling like an afterthought. I also add the city back in at this point and paint in a smoky haze behind the character to add some more depth and just a little bit like a foggy apocalyptic look. And here's where I throw in the moon to act as a large circular framing element, which is going to help tie in the other elements of this design better. I also add a simple layer style on the Blade Runner type and frame it as well. well using those lens flares from earlier, which I just ripped off of Google, by the way. I decided to throw in these logos, which I believe are from the movie. I hope it is, at least. It's what came up when I searched for Blade Runner logo. I just thought there's no way a movie like this doesn't have some sick logo to incorporate, and I was proven right. So yeah, I added them because they were sick. Now around here is where I finish up the design with the touch of blue for the background. So in the new version of DEPTHTONE, all you have to do is duplicate the whole template group, set the colors of that duplicate group to whatever you want, and then in the layer mask for that duplicate group, just paint in with a soft brush or whatever brush where you want that color to be on the design. Now, if you're using a soft brush like I am, you will need to dither that layer mask so that there's no transparencies. And that's what the DEPTHTONE actions are for, which you can see me using here. So after running those DEPTHTONE actions, we now have that grainy fade on the layer mask, which helps keep the effects on the design all consistent. It's looking nice. All right, here was the original design that was submitted. And here it is after all the changes that I mentioned. Yay or nay? Okay, let's move on to the final design here. Thank you, Rocky Jr., for sending this one in. You really stole my heart with this one because I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. This is a fairly simple design and I love simple. I actually wish I was better at doing simple designs because I always end up adding just way too much. I think you did a great job in your thought process here. This is a pretty cool image, and of course it's got that guitar neck sort of sticking out to the right, which you ended up balancing out with this piece of text here. And the purple on it is also a very nice touch. I like how that pairs with the white. And the Stevie Ray Vaughan word mark is great. I don't know if you made that or if you found it somewhere, but I love it. I love how funky it is. And then I like how you brought it all back home with this sort of simple type arrangement with double trouble and US Tour down here being sort of straight and rectangular formatted to contrast with the angles of everything else in the design. So really good stuff here. But with all that being said, here's why I chose this design to critique. So like I said, I really like that you balanced out the weight of this design or this image where the neck of the guitar sticks out all the way to the right, and you're balancing that out using this word mark over here, which is a great choice. But I do think this word mark is a bit too stylized and sort of angular to do that all on its own. So I'm going to keep this word mark right around here so that we maintain that balance, but I'm going to skew it a little bit to make this a little bit straighter. And I'm also going to simplify this layer style down a little bit to make way for a background that I'm going to add to frame this design off. So while I mentioned that, I do think I'm going to add sort of an overarching framing element to the whole design here. And the best way to start doing that is just by thinking about various basic shapes like a rectangle or a triangle or a circle even, to add to the background of a design to frame all the elements within the graphic and also help your eyes decide where to go when you're reading this graphic. So that's really going to help tighten it up and unify all the elements in here. To me, as of right now, they're all kind of in their own space with no connecting elements between them. So I would just find a way to unify it and get rid of some of this negative space here. I'm going to do that using a large framing element like a big rectangle. And doing that is also going to help a bit with the clashing angles between the type and the guitar neck here. Again, we have a thresholded or stamped Xerox grain looking image here. Something tells me you thresholded this or did the effects on a low DPI document, or maybe upscaled it using the wrong interpolation method, or maybe you were going for this more sort of bitmapped look. But when I zoom in here, you can see that the effects on this image are really pixelated and they don't hold as much detail as I would want them to. Again, I don't know if that's what you were going for, but that's just my observation there. And we also have sort of an inconsistent look on the fading out of this image here. So I'm assuming you use the dissolve blend mode to fade out this part of the image here, which is why it's so tiny and granular, which is a great way to fade things out because you get this sort of grainy fade. But I would say that it's only great when you match that sort of look with the rest of the graphics. So we have this sort of large pixelated spots here on the effects within this graphic, and that just doesn't clash too well with the really tiny in comparison and granular fade that we have down at the bottom here. So I'm just going to make that all a bit more consistent in terms of the effects on this image. And I'm also going to do that trick that I mentioned earlier, which is using the shadows and highlights adjustments to bring more detail back into the shadows here and just bring a bit more detail back into the image in general. All right, so now let's see how I workshopped this design. Okay, so the first thing I did here was redo the effects on the image. Instead of doing it directly on the image, I use a threshold adjustment layer on top and a grain layer right underneath that threshold layer set to overlay. Now anything we put under those layers is going to have that Xerox effect, which you'll see come in handy here. That's a technique that I outlined in my threshold video, so go check that out to see what I'm talking about. Now I'm adding the frame, just a large rectangular frame, which is going to help give all the elements in this graphic a sort of base and grid to adhere to. So whenever I need to frame a graphic, I just think in terms of simple shapes, no need to get all fancy. circles, rectangles, etc. I'm grunging up that frame now to keep the distressed look consistent across this graphic. I'm just using the textures from my Inkwell texture kit here. You can cop that on my website if you'd like. I also throw in another texture from my Inkwell texture kit to give that frame some backing and fill in some of that negative space. Now I add that text back in and I'm going very minimal with the layer style, just a simple white highlight and black drop shadow to separate it from the other elements or the background of the composition. And finally, I decide to place that complementary text down at the bottom right, which I'm a little bit iffy about, but I think it still works. Then I add another texture from my Inkwell texture kit on top of everything to finish it off. And boom, this is the original design from the submission. And drumroll. Here is the final design after all of my suggestions. Did I make it or break it? Okay guys, that's a wrap. This was fun. Let's do it again sometime. I hope you enjoyed seeing things through my eyes and how I leverage design concepts in my own workflow. I think this is a great format to learn design in because we're not just learning different cool effects, we're learning design IQ and how to composite a design in a way where it doesn't just look cool, but it also makes sense. So hopefully this helps you to approach design in a bit more of a pragmatic way. And like I mentioned in my previous critique video, you don't have to wait for me to critique your design. You can use what you learn here in terms of thought process and design principles to find what may be missing in your own designs and then leverage those concepts to improve and improve on your design until you think that it's the best it can be, and then you let me tear it apart. I know, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you everyone who submitted their designs for this video. Remember, if you want to be featured in one of these videos, go ahead and follow my Instagram at Duran Studio. This was really fun, but most importantly, I do hope you learned something from this video. That is why I make these videos, so that we can all grow as designers together. Now I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out.